As the 2020 US presidential election comes closer, the country has become increasingly polarized along racial lines. Clashes between left-wing protesters, law enforcement, and an organized and violent far-right movement only seem to be escalating. And President Donald Trump has been repeating a classic election slogan, law and order. It's been used successfully by previous presidential candidates to stoke racial tensions and turn elections in their favor in the past. In April of 1968, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. sparked riots in mostly Democrat-governed cities like Baltimore, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. At the Democratic National Convention that year, police cracked down violently on anti-Vietnam War protesters. The Democratic nominee, Hubert Humphrey, promised to address racial inequality with a war on poverty, but this did little to calm Americans who were watching riots in their cities and a mounting death toll in Vietnam.
In recent years, crime in this country has grown 9 times as fast as population. At the current rate, the crimes of violence in America will double by 1972.
Nixon made appeals to what he called
the great silent majority,
winning the election.
We owe it to the decent and law-abiding citizens of America to take the offensive.
4 years later, he used law and order rhetoric to win again, this time in a landslide. In 1988, Vice President George Bush was behind Democrat Michael Dukakis by a huge 10-point margin, facing certain defeat. But, like Nixon, Bush was able to use law and order to flip the election in his favor. Dukakis had been governor of Massachusetts when the state introduced a weekend parole program for prisoners. In 1974, Willie Horton, an African-American man involved in the robbery and murder of a teenage gas station attendant, was released during this program. He escaped and went on to rape and murder another victim. Dukakis had not designed the release program, but he had supported it. The Bush campaign immediately capitalized on this. This now famous election ad shows prisoners going through a revolving prison gate, including a black inmate clearly meant to represent Horton. Bush's message was simple and difficult for the Democrats to push back on.
Now Michael Dukakis says he wants to do for America what he's done for Massachusetts. America can't afford that risk.
Determined not to meet the same fate, Bill Clinton went on the attack in the 1992 election. He aimed to win over so-called Reagan Democrats, socially conservative white voters who had switched to voting Republican in the 1960s and 1970s. This required giving the impression to poor and working-class white voters that he would be tougher on black communities than any Republican. Clinton went on to sign the historic Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, commonly referred to as the 1994 Crime Bill, the largest crime bill in the history of the United States, which provided for 100,000 new police officers and $9.7 billion in funding for prisons. 2020 is complex. Donald Trump has wasted no time using law and order as a slogan. He has refused to condemn white supremacist groups and has openly attacked the Black Lives Matter movement.
What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
who would
right
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left.
Will this divisive language work? It's still too early to tell.
One law and order, and that is what it is. One law. We have one beautiful law.